Hi, everyone. Happy Monday to you. Isaac Petcast coming to you from the Alert Desk here on Erie News Now. We're on Facebook and ENN Plus right now as we're breaking in for what is a debate between House Republicans and Democrats, as right now the House of Representatives is debating on whether or not to pass the Cash Act. This is an act that would increase direct stimulus payments for eligible Americans from $600 to $2,000. This is the point of contention and the point of debate that has been up in the air for so many lawmakers regarding this new stimulus package on Capitol Hill. If you remember, the Washington, D.C. lawmakers, both on the Democrat and Republican side, as well as the president, have all signed this bill, which would include $600 direct payments to eligible Americans. However, there was President Trump a few days ago saying that he'd like those payments to be increased to $2,000. So the House brought up legislation to make that happen. It was rejected by Republicans a few days ago. The House is bringing it back up today, and a vote is expected in about the next 30 to 40 minutes or so. Right now, though, we want to bring you some live coverage of that debate right now inside the House. You see it going on right here.
So we do have inflation.
Democrats
it's just
and
that we keep
Republicans
changing the
arguing
definition
on whether or not
to mask
this should
it.
be passed. We'll take you to
That's why the market is up. The market is up because we really do have inflation. We're in the U.S. Congress. We should not think the way to prosperity is just printing money. We should act like we're the United States. It's why that for my whole life, other countries like to invest in the dollar. They respect the value of the dollar more than the national currencies of Burundi, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Bolivia. Those are four per countries. That's why I picked them out. So I encourage Senator McDonnell to hold the line here, to act responsibly. Thank you.
Has expired. Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas reserves, and the gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Might I remind the gentleman that this is not about creating a path to prosperity. This is a better path about creating a path to liquidity, which subsequently creates a path to demand for people at the lower end of the economic spectrum, 20 million of whom are not working at the moment through no fault of their own. And with that, let me yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, an excellent member of the Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Beyer, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise to support the Cash Act, which will send $2,000 checks to the American people. I want to thank Chairman Neal for coming together very quickly to create this act in a thoughtful way. The American people are hurting this holiday season, and they need our help. Our bill would increase those payments to $2,000, which would also include adult dependents, students, and realizing that $600 is not enough for people facing eviction and hunger. For many, this would just pay a past due rental bill from July. It's good and important that we're sending support to small businesses, strong unemployment aid, nutrition and rental assistance, but this relief is coming 7 months later than it should have. And it's vital that Congress not penny pinch the American people now. This cash bill is bipartisan, and if Senator Mitch McConnell would put it on the Senate floor, it would be bicameral. Let me push back too that this is too much. If 40 million Americans work full-time and make less than $18,000 last year, the minimum wage, $7.25, there isn't a single two-bedroom apartment you can rent in a county in America for that money. Tens of millions without health care. My family sells new cars and used cars, and I've watched the debt burden of so many people just rise and rise and rise over the years. Is there a better way? You know, my Republican friends hate it when so-called big government decides what we need. The best way to let people manage their family is to put the money in their hands. Give them that American freedom. Somehow we can print money to do a $4 trillion tax cut over 20 years, but we can't print enough money to help the American people. This is a good bill. I salute my chairman, Richie Neal, and I hope every Democrat and every Republican will vote for it. And I yield back.
Gentleman from Virginia yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute. The gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's get this straight. The small shopkeeper who's lost their entire savings because of the lockdowns will get the same $2,000 grant as the government bureaucrat who's been enjoying a steady paycheck at home for the past 10 months. This money is wholly inadequate for those who've been harmed by the lockdowns and wholly unnecessary for those who have not. And this free money doesn't come from heaven. It comes from the future earnings of those who will be struggling to get back on their feet, making the post-lockdown recovery more difficult and prolonged. And much of the burden of this debt will fall on the young, who've already borne the brunt of these lockdowns. It is, in a real sense, a massive wealth transfer from the future to the present, from the young to the old, and from those who have been hurt by the lockdowns to those who have not. There is only one way to end the suffering caused by these lockdowns, and that is to end them. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Texas, Congresswoman Jackson Lee.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman and the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee for his distinguished leadership. I thank our speaker for her persistent leadership and all of the Democratic members and Republican members who understand what this legislation is. It is a survival cash payment for Americans making under a certain amount, which means they are on the survival pathway. Maybe they haven't spoken to the constituents of, I believe, probably 90% of the members of this Congress who have said they are on the edge and they're about to go over. They can't pay their rent. They can't buy food. They're in food distribution lines. Before I came here Sunday, I was in a place at a church in a Greenhouse International where we were giving out food. I asked during the spring for $3,000. I was willing to go for $600 so that desperate Americans could get enough to survive. I am supporting this. I ask my friends and colleagues on both sides of the aisles, recognize that when you are privileged to stand in a place like this, where the constitutional fathers gave us the opportunity to lead this government, stand for the American people. I support the Cash Act because it is survival for Americans.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I yield myself 30 seconds.
The gentleman's recognized.
I would point out to my colleague that nothing in this bill helps anyone get back to work. Not a dime to the 8 million people who are left unemployed because of COVID. Not a dime to help our small and medium-sized businesses. Not a dime for Main Street. With that, I continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Congressman Green.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the chair for yielding the time. Mr. Speaker, at some point on the infinite continuum that we call time, we will all have to account for our time. We're all going to have to answer the question, where were you when a pandemic was gripping the land? What did you do when you had the opportunity to put money in the pockets of people who needed it? Where was your courage when you had the chance to cast a vote to make a difference in the lives of people? I say to you, my dear friends, this is the time for us to take a stand for the American people. Let's vote yes to put money in their pockets because we caused them to stay home as a result of the pandemic. The government is for this reason. This is why the government exists, to take care of people. I yield back the balance of my time.
And yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So let me remind members of this chamber why we're here today. The CARES Act passed this House with, I think, 5 dissenters in the entire chamber. That was months and months ago. People exhausted the $1,200 that we allocated based upon our tax system and even the difficulty that we had in trying to find adequate identification for those in America as joint filers making under $24,000 a year, single filers making under $12,000 a year. Who can live on $12,000 a year? That's $1,000 a month. People have exhausted that benefit. They have tried earnestly and seriously to overcome these obstacles that were created for them, not because of anything they did. We are not here because of malfeasance, speculation that derailed Wall Street in 2008, or corruption. We're here because of an international pandemic when members of the American family at the lower end of the economic spectrum are hurting. When we sought advice on putting together the CARES Act, the Speaker and myself in particular, in those very earnest days with Secretary Mnuchin, we sought the advice of the best economists, former Treasury secretaries, members of the Federal Reserve Board, people that do this every single day, and they all said you need to act with speed and determination. Speed! To get that money into the hands of people who will actually spend it, and that's precisely what we did. We got it to people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. But as we proceed now to the new year, these people need another infusion of cash. And I'm going to go back to this point that I think is something that we need to remember. 3 years ago, this House, over the objection of myself and many others, passed a tax cut that clearly benefited the people at the very top of the economic spectrum, the top 1% in particular. Dividends, buybacks, a top cut in the corporate rate from 36 to 21%, the top rate into the individual side from 39 to 37%. And we can't find it in our hearts in this holiday season, again based upon the Charles Dickens parable of A Christmas Carol, to provide $2,000 worth of assistance to our brothers and sisters at the bottom end of economic income. This chamber is better than that. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas.
So I will reserve as well.
Gentleman from Texas reserves.
Okay. I was hoping that the ranking member might have more to say.
I am prepared to close when you are.
Well, we're not quite prepared to close, but we were hoping that you might intermittently.
I'll tell you what. Let me, with your permission, I'll yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Madam Speaker, you can say a lot about this Congress, but you cannot say we have not worked together and appropriated remarkable funding to help families defeat this COVID, to get back on their feet, to save small businesses. And a good example is that so far, Congress, both parties, have already approved more than $20,800 direct cash payments to a family of four with one parent out of work. That's on top of an estimated $18,000 of state unemployment benefits, a little less than $40,000 to help working families survive this COVID pandemic. But today, we do nothing in this bill to help the 8 million Americans who lost their job due to COVID. We could double the amount of money that goes to small businesses or mid-sized businesses so they can rehire their workers and keep them on the payroll to try to survive and ride this out. We don't know yet what the vaccinations will do to consumer confidence or to the lockdowns. Our view, and again, we expect a number of Republicans to support this bill. In my view, we would be wiser to assess the impact of the vaccinations and the recovery going forward so that we can target relief to Main Street, to helping get people back to work, and to truly stimulating our local economy. That's where we address the harm that's been done by COVID. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm glad the ranking member reminded us of what we were able to accomplish together in the CARES Act, and I think that's what we're asking for here again this evening. With that, let me recognize the gentlelady from California, the Speaker of the House, Speaker Pelosi.
The distinguished Speaker of the House is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him for his masterful work in not only bringing this legislation to the floor, but working in a bipartisan way to have so many important initiatives in the COVID and the omnibus bill that the President happily for us signed last evening. I thank him for his initiatives that are job-creating, that stimulate the economy and help meet the needs of the American people. I'm interested in the comments made by Mr. Brady because he said we could be putting more money into small business, and we do indeed in the COVID package, around $300 billion. And I think it's important to note, Madam Speaker, that that brings it to about almost $1 trillion since March 27th, 28th, when the President signed the CARES Act, about $950 billion for small business, nearly $1 trillion. Very important. Small business is the heart of our economy. What could be more optimistic for anyone to do but to follow their dreams, start a small business, create jobs, create wealth, create capital? So important. We see the importance of that to the tune of about $1 trillion, just under $1 trillion in these past several months. But if you want to talk about job creation, I hope the gentleman will join us when we go forward to do state and local, our healthcare workers, honoring our heroes. They're at risk of losing their jobs. While they risk their lives to save lives, they may lose their jobs, and over 1 million of them have. We're talking about healthcare workers. We're talking about police and fire, our first responders. We're talking about transportation, sanitation, food workers. We're talking about our teachers, the custodians of our children for a large part of their day. They are at risk of losing their jobs because of the failure of the Republican side of the aisle to support funds for state and local government to honor our heroes. We want to honor them. When we cheer them, we applaud them. Let's give them pay. Let's let them have job security. Let's give them PPE, the equipment that they need to do their jobs. So if we want to talk about saving jobs or growing jobs for the purpose the distinguished gentleman from Texas mentioned, how we're going to focus on the distribution and the administration of the vaccine. Where do you think that happens but in city and county and state hospitals in large measure, by healthcare workers in those places, wherever it is distributed on an individual basis. But they are the heart of the matter. And that is why we need to go forward with another bill that invests in our state and local governments, not to talk about government, but to talk about services, healthcare services, education, transportation, making our lives possible, making our very existence possible by what they do. And without them, how do we function? So again, let's create jobs, let's save jobs, let's grow jobs by administering this vaccine as fairly, as equitably as possible, and free to everyone in our country, because if we're not protected, none of us is. Unless all of us are protected, none of us is protected. So this $2,000, which thank you for bringing to the floor on Christmas Eve, was roundly rejected by a Republican that asked for unanimous consent. This could already be exist as a law if that had happened, but it didn't. So now today we have another chance. Some of the Republicans said, oh, if they really wanted that, they would have called for a vote that day. That wasn't true. It's important to note that was a pro forma session, and you had to have the consent of the Republicans to bring the bill to the floor. They withheld their consent. So here we are today in a legislative day where we just act with the majority to bring the legislation to the floor. I hope it will enjoy a strong bipartisan support. The President of the United States has put this forth as something that he wants to see in terms of, and part of his signing the legislation yesterday. I hope that that view will be shared by the Republicans in the Senate, because we will pass this bill today, either under suspension or under a rule where it just requires a majority vote. Under suspension, as you know, 2/3 vote requires a large number of Republican votes, which I hope we will have, because I do think that the American people would love to see that unity on their behalf. We are a consumer economy. Putting money into the hands of the American people is a boost to our economy. Not much. This isn't a big stimulus package. The COVID bill is a emergency supplemental, but this piece will make it something very important to sustaining our economy. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the work that your committee did. Brandon, thank him, and the others for putting in the dependent clause that people had if otherwise you had 16 years and under would get the direct payment. But I mean, as a mother of 5 and grandmother of 9, I know that children are dependent after 16 years of old, especially if they're still in school. And there are others who are dependent because of, for one thing and another, some physical challenges that they may have in life. Who knows what goes on in a family? But nonetheless, if they are dependent, they will be receiving the direct payment. Another important boost for America's working families, another important boost for our economy as we go forward. So let me again thank the chairman for his work. It's a simple vote. We put more money. Our goals have been crush the virus, honor our heroes who help us crush the virus, and put money in the pockets of the American people. Today, we would be doing that right now. Legislation will be a lifeline for millions of Americans. It improves on the previously passed relief bill by including dependents, ensuring that families with children in colleges, adults living with disabilities, or elderly family members can also receive relief. Republicans have a choice. Vote for this legislation or vote to deny the American people the bigger paychecks they need. To reject this would be in denial of the economic challenges that people are facing, and it would deny them, again, the relief they need. And with that, I urge a strong bipartisan vote for the aptly named Cash Act. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from California, the Speaker of the House, yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Madam Speaker, may I just inquire how much time is remaining?
The gentleman from Texas has 9 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Massachusetts has 3.5 minutes remaining.
So, Madam Speaker, we are prepared to close. And with that, I would yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman from Texas is yielding himself such time as he may consume. The gentleman is recognized.
First, let me congratulate the Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Neal, for working so closely together on our bipartisan priorities. Ending surprise medical bills when you go to the ER or you have a scheduled medical procedure, ensuring starting at the end of next year for the first time, when you go to that doctor's procedure, you have a true and honest bill in advance of that, will be so crucial for so many patients. And I also thank the chairman for working so closely in a bipartisan way on the COVID tax relief provisions and the first reforms of our temporary tax provisions in 5 years. So, Chairman Neal, I applaud your work and enjoy working with you. The previous speaker talked about essential workers, our firefighters, our healthcare workers, others, manufacturers who've done such an amazing job. We had an opportunity earlier this year to help them. President Trump, in his executive order, proposed a payroll tax holiday for nearly 5 months for these workers. That would have meant for those essential workers, that firefighter, that hospital worker, that nurse, that they would have kept, a family of 4 would have kept an extra $5,000 in their paycheck throughout the holidays. If we really wanted to help essential workers, our Democrat friends would not have blocked that payroll tax holiday and would have adopted our bill to make sure that those taxes, payroll taxes, were forgiven. As for state and local governments, they too, even though I disagree with many of the decisions, deserve our thanks. And thankfully, because this was the most rapid labor market recovery following a crisis in history, and we recovered more than half the jobs we've lost. State and local revenues this year are almost even, down a mere less than 1%. Thank goodness Congress came together in the CARES Act to provide more than $150 billion to those state and local governments to be able to address these needs and continue to function. I will tell you, too, that, again, I speak only for myself. The best way to help struggling families is to get them back to work. The best way to save our Main Street is to give our small, medium-sized businesses more help than we have. This bill does neither. I think it is correct when the earlier speaker said this is not a stimulus. It is not. And it does nothing to help get people back to work. I worry that as we spend another nearly $500 billion so hastily, that we're not targeting this help to the very the Americans who are struggling the most and need that help. I will also point out that, as I said earlier, Congress has come together to provide a family of 4 with one unemployed parent now just a little short of $40,000 of federal money in their traditional state unemployment because we knew they were struggling. Now is the time to get them back to work. That is my personal objection to this bill. I urge Congress to pause for a moment, to assess the vaccinations over the next few months or year, to determine where next we need to weigh in, if at all, on this recovery as we continue to work together to defeat this virus. With that, Madam Speaker, I am honored to be here today, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas yields the balance of his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm prepared to close. And I want to acknowledge the good efforts of Ranking Member Brady on the energy front in the tax package as well. A series of compromised measures. He did a terrific job, I think it's fair to say, on surprise billing, and not to mention USMCA. Those were very substantive accomplishments that the Ways and Means Committee led on in the 116th Congress. He mentioned that, as he was closing, he mentioned that this measure he did not want to see treated as stimulus, and he's right. This is not about stimulus. This is about stability. This is about building a bridge for those people who are really hurting as we turn the page on this year. This is about those who are wondering how they're going to make the next rental payment, sustenance for the American family, how they might repair that automobile that sits in the garage idle because they couldn't afford it. That's what this is really about this evening. I started with Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol and the lessons of Jacob Marley. But let me conclude with a very simple description in the epic America. When asked what it was that set America apart from the rest of the world, it was suggested it was a habit of the heart. a kindness and a decency and a goodness. And let me close the debate on that basis and urge passage of the Cash Act and $2,000 for the American people. I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 9051? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, purposes of the gentleman from Texas rise.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the conference, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3 of House Resolution 965, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed.
Great job, Danielle.
Corrected that to 20. She'll correct it in the record. Yeah. I said.
So as you can see there, the House has gone with their vote here. We're expecting that vote to pass. Again, you heard Representative Kevin Brady asking for the yeas and nays. Was not granted that. The Speaker giving the 2/3 majority. So we do believe at this moment it is official that this bill has passed the House of Representatives. We just want to check for clarification here. Let's go back out to the House to make sure there are any further measures here to be looked at.
Well, this is Mrs. Thorne.
Thank you, though. I mean, if I do need this fixed, we're in trouble.
That's half the lag will be gone.
At 5 legislative.
Pursuant to Section 4 of House Resolution 1271, the unfinished business is the further consideration of the veto message of the President on the bill H.R. 6395. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Let me turn my mic up here. Again, want to mention, it does seem like the House has passed the Cash Act, which would increase those payments from $600 to $2,000, those direct stimulus payments for eligible Americans. So Erie News Now is coming up in just a few minutes. When we get there, we'll break this down, what this means, and explain even further here in just a little bit. For now, though, we're going to go ahead and let you go back to your regularly scheduled programming and leave you on Facebook and ENN+. But again, keep an eye, Erie News Now at 5 and Erie News Now throughout the evening for updates. Take care.